Absolute DC has been off to a pretty phenomenal start. Now, Absolute DC is a brand new comic line of DC Comics centering around popular DC characters in our alternate universe from the events of the main DC continuity due to what happened in DC's All-In #1, forcingly an overarching storyline that will be culminated with over the next few years for all we can tell. Just like with the Ultimate Marvel Universe now that Marvel is doing with their essential reboot of that Ultimate Universe, we're getting an entirely new comic line in an entirely separate universe where writers can basically write these insanely new and interesting stories without contradicting or screwing up the mainline continuity too much or making things too difficult to tell the stories that they want to tell. Now, I love Elseworld stories, I like new takes on characters, but if you're going to do something in the, let's say, mainline continuity, you can't do something too crazy or out there to completely change the character as a whole unless it fully makes sense, or if it just ends up being the new status quo for all we know, but still being the same character deep down, and also depends on if the storyline is well written or not. But doing these alternate universes that will eventually have their brand new comic lines, have their own crossovers and team-ups, you can experiment. You can make things to be different so that people will actually understand that yes, this is an entirely different universe, different rules, different origins, something is essentially different, and so they can jump in without too high expectations of it being the exact same thing. Now, before I jump a bit more into what Absolute DC is, how it came to be, and what the baseline story for the current 3 runs that we have right now are, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. Really helps, and it shows you guys enjoy the content I make here on the channel and shows you want to see more. I plan to do actual issue coverings of Absolute Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman once the main arcs of all 3 of these comics end up reaching their conclusion, and I'll do a recap video for each one of these opening arcs once they're done. So you guys can get a brief recap of these arcs before jumping into the latest issues. And in this channel, I will do video essays, recommendations, and recaps of different stories so that you guys can be ready for other stuff or to see my opinions and other people's opinions and start discussions over all things comic books. Now that out of the way, let's jump right into things. So what is the Absolute DC Universe? Well, to put it plainly, the Absolute DC Universe is a brand new universe within DC Comics that was created as the repercussions of Darkseid's actions. In DC's All-In Issue 1, which I highly recommend you read to get the full details of everything that's happened, Darkseid, in a quest to essentially break free of the chains of the main multiverse, the main universe that he is in, Earth Prime, Universe Zero, he essentially tries to create a machine to break out of his confinement and essentially escape the laws of that universe and become a true god, a true being of absolution with an entirely new universe, to be his own god truly in all manner of form, despite him being quote-unquote a new god and kind of having its own balance within the DC multiverse. After forcibly fusing himself with the Spectre, one of the most powerful characters in DC, he rolls up on the Justice League as the new Justice League Unlimited era in the comics begins, fights off all of them, and we get a bit of lore into the DC universe, multiverse, and how it works. And essentially a lot of the main universes within DC have Superman energy. Essentially Superman as a character is essentially the core of that universe, and so that very concept and energy of Superman flows throughout that entire universe, in each individual universe, and it ends up being a whole core, which is why there's so much hope, optimism, and heroism within these worlds, and why they have more of a likelihood to just overcome all evil and darkness. At least that's the meta contextual level of it. And Darkseid, after making this machine, fusing with the Spectre, he eventually has a pseudo-death in the main universe, but his spirit and energy flows and creates a brand new universe, one where him, Darkseid energy, is the center and focal point. And in this brand new absolute universe that we get, heroism is on the decline. It is the underdog. A world of oppression, darkness, and struggle is the norm. It is not the same DC universe. All these characters are gonna have to work their way up, not be in paradise, be in hell. Hope is the underdog, and something is not the same for everybody. And so one of the main concepts of the absolute universe that ends up being the case, at least for our Trinity, is that a main part of who they are as characters is not really there, at least in a manner of speaking, in their new universes. Example, Batman's not a millionaire. He doesn't have a trust fund both his parents didn't die in an alley from a mugging gone wrong. Bruce grew up in a middle-class family, a working man. His dad was a teacher, and after a trip to the zoo, his dad was killed, and so eventually Bruce would end up growing up to be Batman to try and clean up the streets, take out criminals, etc. But this ends up being something a bit different, as Bruce, while incredibly smart still and very perceptive, he essentially grew up as a working class man, a blue-collar worker, and worked multiple different jobs all across Gotham, essentially fine-tuning his own skills, which ends up making sense how he's able to have so many safe stashes, safe houses, many back caves, make his own Batmobile. All that stuff makes sense due to all the experience he's culminated over the years working all these different jobs, and also explains how he knows Gotham like the back of his hand because he's worked all over the place and has memorized it, which is how he's able to get around so easily and know where everything is. And also, he grew up in Crime Alley with characters that would eventually become, most likely in the Absolute Universe, his rogues gallery, like Edward Nygma, Oswald Cobblepot, Selena Kyle, Harvey Dent, etc. But there's already a huge departure from Batman. Also, his mother is alive, so that is another thing. But yeah, that's already a huge thing from Batman that is taken up for him. He's also a lot more brutal. He's not a killer, but he will maim people, he'll cut off people's hands, the giant bat logo on his chest, the frickin' FU axe. It's insane. Alfred isn't his butler, but is actually like a secret covert ops assassin that is trying to work with Batman off the books to try and take out this international crime boss slash terrorist, all that stuff. It's a lot of interesting ideas that is so far being done pretty well, and I'm excited to see where this leads off, because we're 3 issues into a 5-issue opening act story, which I'm pretty convinced is going to have a pretty big and explosive finale leading into huge repercussions for the rest of the book. Absolute Wonder Woman is something entirely different. Instead of being raised on Themyscira with the Amazons, Diana is brought into hell to be raised by the Amazon sorceress Circe and by Apollo, and essentially she is the seemingly last Amazon, and the word Amazon is forbidden to be said by many others. Yet, being raised in hell, Diana is still like a kind, compassionate, empathetic person, despite being raised in literal hell by a witch. And she ends up learning a lot of different types of magic, learns about the isle that she's on. There is interesting world building being done with this side of the DC Absolute Universe, and we get to see Diana in the real world on Earth fighting against these hordes of demons with a flying skeleton Pegasus that breathes fire, a giant buster sword, a red version of the lasso of truth, which is more so a lasso of sin, I believe it is, that weighs people down and creatures by the weight of their sins, and she can use magic to varying degrees, as she was raised by a witch in this instance. And so this leaves us with many questions. Why are these hell beasts rising up and attacking Earth now? Why are the Amazons seemingly extinct? Why is the word Amazon forbidden to be said amongst like the Greek gods and the Pantheon and all that? There's a lot to see with how this is going to go with Wonder Woman, and right now the action and art in that series is honestly incredibly well done, and I'm excited to see where we go, because this seems to be a more, darker take on Diana as Wonder Woman, but still being the more hopeful and sympathetic and empathetic character that she is in a literal hellscape of a world with hard to make life decisions. But even still, she is still an incredibly well done character so far, and I'm excited to see where this opening act goes for Wonder Woman in the Absolute Universe, and how this ties into the wider story and lore that's being built up from her comic that could potentially lead into the overarching story of DC's new All-In Initiative and the new Absolute Universe, and how that leads into Darkseid. Next up is Absolute Superman, the last of our new versions of the Absolute version of the main trinity of DC, and this one is probably outside of Batman, the biggest departure of Superman in this universe. Instead of being a baby launched at the destruction of Krypton to be raised on Earth by a pair of farmers in Smallville, Kal-El Superman was actually raised for at least 10 years of his life or so on Krypton by his 2 parents on a farm, and Krypto is with him. And he's lived a pretty easygoing life, part of the labor force. There's a lot of classism in Krypton, and it's being used from not just Krypton, but also similarities with Earth once Superman ends up going to Earth to be a sort of commentary on classism, the upper class oppressing the lower class, authoritarianism, all that stuff. And so far, I think the book's doing a pretty good job at delivering that message in a way that doesn't feel overly preachy. Granted, it is kind of in your face about it, but it's being done in an interesting way that goes well for the story at the moment. And issue 3 had a really, really good issue with an extended backstory for what happened during the final days of Krypton. Now, this this one does a lot of good world building for Earth in terms of the fact that there is this thing called the Lazarus Corporation, and it has this group of like overarching police force / maybe mercenaries called the Peacemakers. Yes, Peacemakers, a literal organization of people wearing Peacemaker uniforms and are being incredibly brutal to people, and is like a high security force. They have literal helicopter tanks, and I mean tanks that have helicopter propellers on top of them. That is kind of wild and also a little kind of stupid, but at the same time I kind of like how that looks. We have a new version of Lois Lane that is not a reporter this time, but is part of Lazarus Corps. She seems to be deep digging into her roots as a journalist seemingly, and encounters Superman in an interesting manner where she sees him up close and personal. And after Superman lands on Earth, it's implied that he's been there for a few years, not his whole life, but a few years, hiding, been trying to be out of trouble, but also still being that relatively optimistic person that wants to help people out. Primarily helping the people that are being oppressed or being put in unfair working conditions, to the point where in the first issue, he literally goes down and mines a bunch of diamonds for the people of that town he's in, so they don't get any potential injuries in a very dangerous mine, so that they won't have to kill themselves mining the material they need for Lazarus Corp. And he's been shown with the history of doing this a lot, and he's been being chased by Lazarus Corp as well. We also got teases of this version of Brainiac, which I'm curious to see how this version of Brainiac is going to be like, and I'm curious to see how we get to see more of the last days of Krypton and how that could potentially snowball into how that affects Kal and his overall worldview. That leads into anything else if we'll see a version of Zod in the future. I'm really curious to see what happens with Superman in this version of the universe, because he also has like a seemingly a living suit with an AI built into it that advises him and tells him what to do. Also like a red dust cape that manipulates itself. Honestly, really cool. And it seems like things are going to be a lot harder for Superman to be a symbol of hope and optimism that he is in the mainline comics. And I feel like that's where this version of Superman is going to be. Down in the dirt, dog, facing unsurmountable odds, seemingly doesn't have full control over his abilities in a sense, and against a giant ass, seemingly world-spanning corporation that's been hunting him for a while, and all the while he's still trying to help people, which is a fundamental core of Superman's character, which I'm glad they're keeping in this universe. Because I didn't say this when I started this video, but over the last few years, there's been a trend of people trying to make not just Superman, but just DC as this dark and gritty, super grounded world. And like, for certain characters, grounded and somewhat realistic makes sense. Like, you can do it with Batman. It makes sense despite the whole billionaire dressed up as a bat with these weird gadgets to take down drug dealers and gangsters and mob bosses, all that stuff, and serial killers, you got that. But as you go on to the wider spanning DC universe, and this applies to Marvel and just superheroes in general, trying to keep things, at least as a whole, grounded and realistic kind of hurts the characters, make them a bit too dark, brooding, and depressing. That's my main issue I've had with Zack Snyder's Superman. While Man of Steel was a relatively good movie, it just didn't feel much like a Superman movie to me, and it didn't really hit the man of hope and optimism, and just someone that just genuinely wants to help people that Superman is. And I just feel like that's what we're gonna get with James Gunn's Superman, and right now with Absolute Superman, it seems we're gonna be getting the best of both worlds. We're getting a relatively dark, gritty story, but Superman is at his core still the kind-hearted, optimistic person that looks out for the underdog and also tries to just do his absolute damnedest to help people in any situation. Spoilers for issue 2, he's being chased by Lazarus Corps, and there is a bunch of collateral damage from that chase scene, and he's prioritizing saving innocent civilians while he's being chased so that they don't get hurt from his presence. It's a very Superman thing to do, and I'm just happy that despite this being a bit of a darker, more edgier universe to an extent, we're still keeping fundamental cores of these characters that make them work and loved in the first place, which is something I really do appreciate the writers doing for these characters. And once we eventually get Absolute Martian Manhunter, Absolute Flash, and Absolute Green Lantern, I hope we get these types of aspects for these characters brought into those in this insanely bizarre, dark, and twisted world with Darkseid as the center of it. And yet, despite these very bleak circumstances and honest to God, hard and almost hopeless circumstances for the world and how these characters are seemingly brought up, or at least in the situations they're brought in so far from what we can see from these opening issues, their core characters will rise above it and end up being those well-beloved characters that we all know and love to a degree with the changes for this universe. And I'm very much looking forward to it, and I'm excited to see where these writers and artists bring our Trinity and this new Absolute universe to a head, and see how this ends up being panned out and what new stories that they'll end up telling through this incredibly vast archive of characters and storylines that we've had throughout DC's history, and what new storylines and characters we'll get with this brand new universe. But how do you guys feel about Absolute DC so far? Are you enjoying the issues? Are you excited for any of the future ones that are coming out anytime soon? Or are you still just a mainline comics reader and aren't getting into Absolute DC just yet until there's more issues out for you to binge? Let me know in the comment section down below and what your favorite one of these Absolute titles are in the comments as well. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. Really helps and it shows you guys enjoy the content I make on the channel and shows you want to see more. And with all that said and done, I hope you all